I've blocked in my kittens with a scrub in. I've drawn out the rest of the little face and it has had a chance to dry. So now I'm able to wash in some thin layers of color. So I've done the coat. This is just a mixture of the permanent red, violet, light, and white. And I don't usually use white in my scrub in layers, as I explained, because it usually is picked up a little bit by the next layer. But in this case, because I'm letting it dry, I won't have to deal with that. So I'll start on the lips next, and that is just my permanent red light, thinned down a little bit with water. Just a base layer. This is just a map for future layers, and it's almost going on like a watercolor technique. By using the water added to the paint, it lets it flow on a little more smoothly on this rather coarse canvas. I've mixed up a skin tone of pyro red light and my permanent yellow light. I've added a little bit of white to it. Because I will let this dry before putting on the next layer, I won't have to worry about picking up the white and getting my paint all muddy when I go in with my next layer. And because my base layer with the drawing is dry, I can just wash this over. Kind of like a watercolor. So I'll just scrub in the main shapes, making it easier to come on with future layers, because I'll go into a little more detail on her face and eventually on her hands too, just with some other colors. Just a map and a base so that I don't have to worry about filling in the little white specks that are often left if you've got a coarser canvas. And when I come on with the next layer, because my paint will be dry, I can always brush it just lightly with linseed oil. And that will give me a nice smooth layer to work into. This is what I mean, different colors. I've mixed up a little bit of my permanent red violet light into the mixture. Muted it with a touch of burnt sienna in some cases. Again, just kind of going on almost like a watercolor. Spreading in one layer, and I'm not worried about brush strokes here. Everything here will be covered up. I'm just kind of making sure that it covers the canvas. My paint is slightly thinned with water, so it goes over the drawing and still you can see where the drawing is underneath. Dipping into a few darker mixtures to create some dimension to the face. Children in particular have very subtle variations of value and color often in their faces, and especially in this photo there's not much value variation, so I really have to use color variation to get my different planes, and even at that it'll be very subtle. A little brighter red because of the light reflecting through her ear. And adding some dimension to the hands, a little extra color. This wouldn't be necessary, but it just is kind of a trial run for the next layer and helps you to understand if you can get a base in, it's always much easier to do the next layer. Just picking up variations here and there. I'm not going to worry about variations in her coat very much because that will be easy to do in the next layer, and also because I'm going to keep that fairly loose. Most of the detail is going to be in her face and hands. Even the kittens will be painted a little more loosely so that I can draw the attention where I want it to be. She's got very fair blonde hair, so a lot of the skin tones will be underneath it. And I can use my Q-tip to wipe out certain areas. This paint is a little bit thinner, so I may have to dampen my Q-tip to get it to wipe out really lightly, or even to get it to show much variation at all. This layer will dry really quickly. It'll just take a couple of days because of the water in it. Again, the trusty Q-tip. Just continuing on with her face. Again, I can brush right over my dry drawing. I'll just fill in the whole forehead area, worry about hairs coming over and variations in her hair later. Mostly it'll be about shadows cast by the hair that will show where the hair actually is, because she is so fair. This little girl is about 2.5, and much younger than that. It's a lot of little ones don't have their facial characteristics defined enough that it will look like them at a later age. So I kind of like to wait till they're at least 2 years old before doing a portrait if I can. I've done newborn babies. I did one in an acrylic blog post that you have seen already. But sometimes it's nicer to wait till they're a little bit older. So the shadows cast by the hair, just putting those variations in. And then I'm going in, like I said, just very much like a watercolor technique with another layer of slightly darker color and water in it, and just basically blending it. Once I get into my next layer, I'll start using stiffer brushes and more brush strokes. But right now it's just a map. Makes it easier to do the next layers. In the next video, I'll show you how I mix the colors for the skin tones. Just adjusting as I go. And skipping on ahead to the hands. Again, just using my photo as a guideline where the skin is a little bit darker, where there's shadows from her coat, where there's some variations. The fingers are usually a little bit redder and darker than other areas. More adjusting to her face. I get quite fiddly with this step because this is where I'm working on the likeness and getting the guidelines for future layers, and the more I can get solved at this stage, the easier the next layers will be. Just keeping all my edges soft. So I'll do just a few more adjustments to get this ready for the next layer and let it dry for a couple of days. And then I'll come back with a video on mixing my colors.